Thank you very much, Chairman. It's more, I suppose, trying to analyse whether there is a paradigm shift in Irish politics rather than whether we need one or not. I think that's fairly self-evident. Anyway, is there a new political landscape in Ireland? I'll start with a little quotation. Fine Gael are virtually dead, and any attempt on their part to give that party a few extra years is doomed to failure. Sounds very like Professor Michael Marsh after the 2002 elections. But it was actually Joseph Blowick, leader of Clonataloon, in 1947 who uttered that famous phrase. Obviously, Joe got it slightly wrong at the time, but it does tell us one thing about Irish politics. Perhaps the more things change, the more they remain the same. So I think if we want to address the Irish political landscape and the extent to which it is changing or not, I think we need first to understand the main characteristics of the landscape. One thing that does interest me about modern politics is the tremendous influx of new people into political parties, and certainly into the party with which I'm associated. It's terrific. But with that comes a certain, sometimes, lack of historical perspective. It's amazing the amount of people know very, very little about the history of the organisation to which they belong, which I think is something of a lack. But it's easily enough addressed. As we all know, the great mothership from which our two main political parties were launched was the Sinn Féin party that emerged from the UK parliamentary elections of December 1918. However, the political landscape we currently enjoy, if that's the right word to use, only began to emerge in June of 1922, in one of the most important elections ever fought in this country. The pro-treaty Sinn Féin party in that election defeated the anti-treaty Sinn Féin party by 59 seats to 35. It was effectively a plebiscite on the Anglo-Irish Treaty of 1922, which had been approved in the Dáil prior to that election. Labour, making its first foray into electoral politics at that time of the Free State, won 16 seats. Now, interestingly enough, you can see a lot of what you see there is actually from that election. You have arguments the pro-treaty side made and arguments the anti-treaty side made. So it's very, very interesting. Now, that election set a pattern for Irish politics which has broadly endured to this day. Pro-treaty Sinn Féin became Common and Gael in the 20s. It became Fine Gael from the early 30s. The anti-treaty Sinn Féin split into Fianna Fáil, and fought for its first election in 1927, and a rump of the old Sinn Féin remained in the form of Sinn Féin, and it has gone through quite an interesting set of metamorphoses along to today. Labour, so both of those main parties came from Sinn Féin. Labour was the odd man out in this regard, in the sense that the Labour Party owes its origin not to the Sinn Féin or the nationalist movement, but rather to the international labour movement. And it has a lot of roots in what happened in Ireland around during the teens of the 19th century. However, that is not entirely the case. It now has a connection to the Sinn Féin organisation as well, in that in 1999 it merged with a party called the Democratic Left. And the Democratic Left had come out of official Sinn Féin, which was a direct descendant of that rump of Sinn Féin which survived after Fianna Fáil left it in the mid-20s. So I suppose we could, if we wanted to, not that anyone wants to, we could say that the Labour Party is an associate member of the old Sinn Féin club. Now, the three-party system, or as sometimes unkindly described as two-and-a-half-party system, established in 22, has broadly remained in place ever since. Nor is there any sign, as I see it, and I may be entirely wrong here, that this system is under any threat. Nearly 70% of the electorate voted for the three main parties in the recent local polls, and the remaining 30% was split up between modern Sinn Féin, the Green Party, a very small number of them, and independents. There's always been a consistent independent. Right back to that election at the beginning, there were 10 or 11 independents, and they're nearly always there in Irish politics. Anyone with a knowledge of Irish history shouldn't be surprised at this result. Historically, new parties don't last in Irish life. I mean, it's a strange thing to have to say. You might remember some of your parties such as Clonapoblicta in the 40s and Clonataloon. Two very interesting and aggressive organisations. You heard Joe Blowick, he was a Clonataloon leader in 47. They emerged, and the Progressive Democrats then emerged in the 80s, so founded about 85. And each of them sprung up in response to some temporary need, some issue, some great idea of the day. However, they have all tended to lose their appeal when the issue they were dealing with is resolved, and then they fall back into the main parties again. Clonapoblicta, by and large, faded back into Fianna Fáil. Both Clonataloon and the Progressive Democrats effectively faded back into Fine Gael, leaving the old landscape, you know, there as it were before. At the present time, we have the Green Party, which is part of an international movement, is quite different from some of the others, and we will see how they will do. We might have a word about that later on. But by and large, it's the Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil and Labour is the consistent and permanent shape of Irish electoral politics. Now, if the three-party system, however, as a whole is not under threat, then it is clear that there is a quiet revolution happening within that system. For the first time in its history, Fine Gael is the biggest party in the state. And to understand the political significance of this, we should look back again at that particular party. It was established in 1933, 1 year after Cumann and Gael, its predecessor, lost its first election to Fianna Fáil in 1932. That's when it also lost government, having run the state for the first 10 years and effectively founded the state that we now currently live in. It was the result of a merger. Fine Gael came about as a merger between Cumann and Gael, the ACA, more commonly and popularly known as the Blue Shirts, and the National Centre Party, a party with strong connections to the old Irish Parliamentary Party of John Redmond, which was a party which comprehensively lost the election in 1918 and lost a mighty role it had for the 60 or 70 years before that. Although most analysis of this period have tended to focus on the inclusion of the Blue Shirts in formation of Fine Gael as being significant, it was in actual fact, in my view, the Centre Party merger that was the significant event on that occasion. By aligning itself with elements of the old Irish Parliamentary Party in 1933, the new Fine Gael party effectively distanced itself from its more radical Republican inheritance, which was the inheritance under which it founded and ran the state for the first 10 years. And Fianna Fáil effectively exploited that development very successfully, tags Fine Gael as being a West Brick party, the establishment party and the party of the status quo, which of course it had been. The incorporation of the Centre Party also allowed Fianna Fáil to argue that its opponent was the party of the lawyer and the party of the big farmer. These would be all familiar terms for the older members of the audience. And Fianna Fáil's, while it itself was seen as the party of the small farmer and the party of the man in the street, and it vied effectively and successfully with Labour for being the party of the working class as well. Fianna Fáil's very successful branding of Fine Gael and Fine Gael's unwillingness or inability to resist that branding is one of the chief reasons why Fine Gael has spent most of its subsequent life since 1932 in opposition. It would be wrong, however, to suggest that Fine Gael's lack of electoral success was simply an issue of poor branding. Fianna Fáil is, as we know and remains, one of the great democratic parties of the world and an election machine par excellence, and anyone who ever underestimates that is always due for a rude awakening. And any party, regardless of brand, would have found it difficult to compete during those years. However, things may be changing, and that's, I suppose, what we're here to discuss. Although it is far too soon to be certain, we may be at an inflection point in Irish politics where the continuing dominance of Fianna Fáil can no longer be taken for granted. If we look at the polls from the last year, June 08 to May 09, they show following key developments. Support for Fianna Fáil over that period has halved from 47% to 24%. You know, they got 25.5% in the recent local elections. Support for Fine Gael has risen from 20% to 34%, and support from Labour went from 10% to 17%, having peaked at 21% in February 2009. And if you look at the local and European elections, two other factors emerged. First, although Labour did very well, it did not achieve the political breakthrough I think they were probably really hoping for, and that the opinion polls indicated that they might get. Labour got 14.5% of the vote in the recent local elections, and converted that into about 14% of the seats. It was Fine Gael really that achieved the very significant breakthrough this time. For the first time in its history, it is the biggest party in the state, and by a large margin. It captured 38.5% of the seats, with 32.2% of the vote. And actually, in terms of numbers of seats, has virtually equivalence with Fianna Fáil and Labour put together. Its lead over Fianna Fáil is about 125 seats or so, which is the biggest lead I think any party has ever had over the other in the history of the state at these elections. So that's and on that same day, an exit poll of 3,300 voters indicated that if a general election were held, Fine Gael would get 37% of the vote in a general election. So that indicates a very, very strong situation, the likes of which Fine Gael vis-a-vis Fianna Fáil has never ever had in its history. Labour's lack of a major breakthrough, I think, reflects an uneven geographical performance on their part. The party did very well in Dublin, did very well in the East generally. It has very good patches in the south of Ireland. They are the largest party in 3 of the 4 local authorities in Dublin. In City Council, in Fingal and in Dún Laoghaire, they are the largest party, and they're second place in South Dublin. Actually, I think that's wrong. They're the largest in South Dublin, the second largest in Dún Laoghaire. However, Labour did very, very poorly in the west of Ireland, where in huge counties it's not represented at all, and it only manages to get 4% of that rural farming vote nationally, which, while it's not essential, it's a very, very important part of how you perform across the country. The most striking aspect of the local elections was the fact that Fine Gael outperformed Fianna Fáil in an election, national election, for the first time since 1927. If you look at the Lansdowne exit poll data, they show that it's actually, at least for now, very solidly and strongly based. Fine Gael scored consistently ahead of Fianna Fáil and Labour in every demographic, and in every socio-economic and in every age group in the population. You know, its highest performance was, you mightn't unexpectedly have it because of what you know about what's happening now, but Fine Gael polled in this exit poll 63% among farmers, who are heavily disaffected with the government at the moment. But it led in all groupings, and its lowest was 29% in the C2DE grouping, and also in the 18 to 24 age grouping. But so it's 29, 33, about 33% in the ABC ones, and 63% among farmers. Fianna Fáil's highest vote then in this poll was 27% in the 50-plus age group, and its lowest was in the 25 to 34 age group, a terribly important demographic politically, because they represent a lot of people starting off families in that, where Fianna Fáil gained only 20% of the vote. So there has been a seismic shift in those areas with regard to Fianna Fáil. Now, while that's positive for Fine Gael, it does leave open the question as to whether 2009 represents a real breakthrough, or indeed what it represents at all. Is it just a temporary blip before normal service resumes? And there are 3 arguments that can be made in favour of the temporary blip idea. One, we're in the middle of a recession, the worst in modern times, and any government party is always going to do badly in mid-term elections. Secondly, the local elections are not a true test of the electorate's mood. And thirdly, Fine Gael was riding high in the early 80s, only to come crashing down a few years later. There's a very good chance that history will repeat itself and that Fianna Fáil will in any case come roaring back when this is all over. So we just have to have a look at those issues and see what we think about them. There's no doubt that any party in government would be under pressure. Fact. However, it's also clear from various pieces of research that there's a difference this time. The electorate holds this government directly responsible for the economic we now face, the economic crisis. That is absolutely clear from research over the last 2 years. In the past, Fianna Fáil could blame somebody else. This time, they're taking full responsibility for it themselves. The electorate has not bought the argument that Ireland is just one economy among many that is suffering from a global recession. There's a general understanding that Ireland is, as a recent IMF report points out, suffering the worst recession of all of the advanced countries. Moreover, all of the economic commentary right now is suggesting that we're a long way from an economic recovery, let alone feeling the beneficial effects of that recovery, which does unfortunately lag the recovery by quite a number of years, as any of you who lived through the 70s and 80s will know. Secondly, I think there's little doubt that the local elections were probably this time a credible test of public opinion. Research on the exit poll shows very clearly, I have the data here if anyone wants to ask me about it later, that the public did vote heavily on national issues on this occasion. They were making a judgment on the government. It's supported by the fact that the local results were broadly in line with the national polls, which were a different thing at the same time. Indeed, an old friend of mine, Gareth Fitzgerald, has argued that because of Fianna Fáil's traditional strength in local government, the results probably underestimate the full extent of the national shift away from Fianna Fáil. And the exit poll on the day gave Fine Gael 37 and Fianna Fáil 21, whereas the actual local election results were Fine Gael were 32 and Fianna Fáil were 25. A much narrower gap in the actual local elections as to what people said they would do, where at a general election they said it would be 37-21. So Garrett has a point there which might be relevant to that, I don't know. I think it's important to remember in this context that Fianna Fáil has always seen control of local government as a key to national success. And they've been tremendously successful in local government all down through the years. This control, in the words of Sean Lamass, he said it cemented Fianna Fáil into the political structures of the country. Well, in 2009, that cement is very, very seriously loosened. There's a legitimate issue that Fine Gael has at times in the past failed to take full advantage of electoral opportunities. Nobody knows that better than myself. Historically, we've suffered from a sense of inferiority which has significantly hindered our ability to win. I've a gut feeling now that it's different on this occasion. I've been around Fine Gael since 1977, and I do see the emergence of a tougher, much more determined and even a winner's mentality in the party. The historical sense of inferiority has been kind of lost with the disaster of 2002 and the rebuild of the party thereafter. I think it is also finally getting a clearer image of what it wants to be. I think there's a desire in Fine Gael to recapture some of the vision and idealism that motivated the founding fathers, the founding generation of the state. There's a growing understanding in the party that the economic crisis obligates us to reinvent the way we run our economy and govern our economy. Our country, put simply, I think that a new and a more radical Fine Gael is emerging. Now, it's by no means there, but there are definitely a lot of signs that it is emerging. The party exploited the disaster of 2002 in a positive way and to its advantage. They used the elections of 04, 07 and 09 to bring a new generation of young politicians into elective Fine Gael. And the fact that so many people had previously lost their seats created space for the new people to come in, which was an invaluable advantage that the party has had in the last 5 or 7 years. Many of those new people are imbued with idealism, new ideas. They are thoroughly products of the modern age. They understand ecology and they live with and understand technology. Fine Gael is now seen to have greater economic competence and credibility than any other party. You might argue that legitimately, but I believe that is true. Fine Gael is now seen its ability to win significant seat bonuses in successive elections. In 04, 6%. In 07 general election, 3.5%. In 09, 6.5% seat bonus. While none of the other parties in the recent election, Fianna Fáil, Labour, Greens or anybody else, won any seat bonus. Fine Gael got 6.5% bonus. That shows, I think, that the party is now better than any other party at managing the electoral process and managing its own votes and the votes it gets. In most recent, Fianna Fáil's reputation for competence in economic matters, which stood them so well and in the last week won them the election in 2007, is now seriously damaged for the reasons I've said previously. And their very longevity, once an asset, is now seen as a liability.
Could I ask you to conclude within 2 minutes, Frank, please?
Well, I'm going to take a little bit longer than that, if you don't mind. Not much longer, but I will. I'll do a little bit more, but it won't take long. Where does all this leave Fianna Fáil? I think it is now Fianna Fáil rather than Fine Gael that has to ask serious questions about itself and its role in Irish society. One of the party's key advantages in the past was its claim that Fianna Fáil wasn't just a political party, it was a national movement. You'll be familiar with that. That Fine Gael was the party of the privileged, while Fianna Fáil was the party of everyone. The party that was in touch with the mood and the soul of the nation. It's hard for Fianna Fáil to continue credibly making those claims, a party which has been repeatedly portrayed recently as a friend of the bankers and the developers. Is it still seen as a party of the people? How can a party that has abandoned so spectacularly in a lot of people's minds the austerity and probity of its founders claim that it is in touch with the needs and desires of ordinary people, particularly in times of deep recession? In the past, Fianna Fáil could count on the fierce loyalty of its voters. If the local elections told us anything, that loyalty can no longer be unquestionably counted on. Those days are probably well and truly gone. In the past, Fianna Fáil could also rely on their leaders being a strong electoral asset. Elections are normally built around leaders. This may not be the case with Brian Cowan. However, Rory Quinn recently described him as the most tribal Fianna Fáil leader since De Valera. But he may lack the charisma and the vision of De Valera. Brian Cowan himself has pointed to Lamass as his political hero, but he may lack Lamass's optimism and his can-do approach to politics and government. In the past, Fianna Fáil was able to present the public with a strong vision of the Ireland it wanted to create. These days, the party simply doesn't seem to do vision. Instead of the language of hope and aspiration, we hear the voice of the technocrat coming through day after day. Is it possible that 2007 was for Fianna Fáil what 1992 was for the British Conservatives? You might remember John Major's election in 92. The election they needed to lose. By winning that election, have they seriously compromised their long-term future? I'm almost there. Am I saying, however, that Fianna Fáil is down and out? Now, go back to what I said earlier. I am absolutely not saying that. I started the session by reading out premature obituaries of Fine Gael, and I'm certainly not writing any obituary of any kind for Fianna Fáil. But I do believe that Fianna Fáil today faces a series of challenges without parallel in its history. And as a result, Fine Gael has a historic opportunity to position itself as the national party of government. Never had that opportunity before. In my opinion, it has it now. To paraphrase the old slogan, used in a different context, Fianna Fáil's difficulty is Fine Gael's opportunity. You'll remember that from another era. But however, and finally, I'll just say this, and in the context of our week, all political parties now and the entire system face perhaps the greatest challenge the system had ever faces, which is to deliver out of our present morass a safe future for our citizens. And how each of them responds to that challenge will also no doubt have a significant effect on the shape of the landscape. We know what happened in the 50s, in the 70s, and the 80s, what was done well, and the huge mistakes that were made. And I'd finish with the philosopher Santana. He probably said it best: those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Let's hope our memories are good. Thank you very much.